Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einer weiteren Folge im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter hier auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und in dieser Woche geht es um folgende Themen. Ukrainischer Terrorangriff auf die Krim. Wie reagiert Russland? Welchen Einfluss hat der Ukraine-Krieg auf den US-Wahlkampf? Und warum suchen die USA eine zunehmende Konfrontation mit der russischen Luftwaffe in Syrien? Hallo Scott, schön, dass du bei uns bist. Wie geht's dir?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Yourself?
Mir geht es sehr gut, danke. Scott, du weißt, wir verlieren immer keine Zeit und springen direkt in die erste Frage. Scott, bei dem ukrainischen Angriff auf die Krimbrücke starb ein russisches Ehepaar. Ihre 14-jährige Tochter wurde schwer verletzt. Russland spricht von einem Terrorangriff auf Zivilisten. Der US-Außenminister Antony Blinken betont, die Ukraine könne selbst entscheiden, welche Mittel sie im Krieg einsetzt. 2 Fragen dazu. Zu welchem Zweck greift die Ukraine die Krimbrücke an? Und befürworten die USA nun auch offiziell tödliche Anschläge auf Zivilisten, solange diese Russen treffen?
First of all, the status of the Crimea Bridge is important here. Russia is a signatory to the Geneva Accords and Protocol 1 of the Geneva Accords. The additional Protocol 1, which was in 1977, which had been pushed by the Soviet Union at that time and is still in effect, gives a definition of what constitutes military objects. And one thing that would constitute a military object are bridges that are used to transport military equipment. That becomes a military target. Now, Russia can say that there was no military equipment on the bridge at the time it was being attacked, and that's fine. But the bottom line is it's clear under international humanitarian law and the laws of war, as defined by accords that Russia has concurred with and agreed with and has signed on to, the Crimea Bridge is a legitimate target of war. End of story. Now, Russia will say that Russia's not at war with Ukraine, that this is a special military operation, and neither Russia nor Ukraine have declared a formal state of war. Russia will further note that the area of Krasnodar, where the bridge, where the part of the bridge that was struck is not under martial law. It's peaceful civilian life, and that these were innocent civilians transiting the bridge when they were struck, and they were. There's no doubt about it. The two adults who died are innocent victims here, and it's tragic what happened to them and their 14-year-old daughter, and it's heartbreaking. There's no question about that. But I think here Russia is parsing words and playing word games. They're saying it's a terrorist attack because Russia's not at war with Ukraine. Ukraine's not at war with Russia, and the part of the bridge that was attacked was associated with the Krasnodar region, etc. But from an international humanitarian law perspective, this was a legitimate target. I know I'm going to make a lot of people unhappy when I say this, but it's just the way it is. What is Ukraine's purpose in striking this? Ukraine has struck the bridge before. And actually the first attack against the bridge, even though the bridge is a legitimate target of war, used terroristic tactics, a car bomb driven by a civilian who may or may not have been witting as to whether or not there was a bomb in his vehicle. This was a terrorist action. It wasn't a military action. This attack appeared to make use of underwater drones of a military characteristic, so it falls in the category of a military attack. Why now? Ukraine is in the midst of a counteroffensive, one of the primary goals of which is to sever the land bridge between Russia proper and Crimea, to drive to the Sea of Azov, to capture or bring under fire control the highway that comes down from Russia through Mariupol and Melitopol into Crimea. This ground attack, which was focused on the Zaporizhia area, has failed. It hasn't even come close to accomplishing this mission. And so one could make the argument that in order to support this attack, Ukraine sought to sever a strategic line of communication from southern Russia into Crimea, through which military materiel that supported the Russian defensive efforts in Zaporizhia were transiting. And one could make that argument. The problem is the timing. It appears that the Ukrainians timed this attack in relationship to the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal, and that this was purely a retaliation for Russia's withdrawal. And moreover, it appears that if the kind of weapon that has been discussed has yet to be confirmed by Russia, but it appears that this was a British-made underwater drone packed with additional explosives. The range of this weapon is such that it could not have been deployed from Ukrainian-controlled territory along the Black Sea from Odessa or elsewhere, that it would have had to have been transported by sea, or by ship, into the Black Sea close to the Crimea coast, and then deployed from that ship to attack. And this would imply that Ukraine used ships that were operating under the protection of the Black Sea, the grain deal, and that these ships were traveling in the so-called green corridor, the safe corridor, out of Odessa. So Ukraine used the Black Sea grain deal to attack Crimea. It's a militarization of a peaceful food program. And this is, not just an act of war, but it's also a violation of the agreements. Ukraine is not supposed to be using this for military use, but they have been for some time now. Russia's response has been devastating. They've attacked Odessa for the second night in a row. Who knows if the attacks will continue? The attacks are not only against the accumulation of military capabilities that have been building up in Odessa under the immunity granted to Odessa by the grain deal, but it appears that Russia has also taken out the port infrastructure that supported the grain deal, meaning that there will never be a grain deal again. It's over. No matter what the world wants, Odessa will never be used as a port to support this. So this is a severe punishment for Ukraine for what they've done in attacking the Crimea bridge. Look, the attack against the Crimea bridge did not sever the line of communication. The train line, which is the major supply route, that's where most of the military equipment comes in on, has been unscathed. The trains still run, and the road portion of the bridge will be repaired, and the bridge will be brought back into order. So this was a political move by the Ukrainians, and one has to ask, why? What is the purpose of this? And it appears that Ukraine is deliberately sabotaging the food program to create the perception amongst the international community of a global food crisis, that billions of people's lives will be put at risk because of the actions of Russia. And they're trying to mobilize international support against Russia. It's just one more example of Ukraine using extreme methods to create perceptions of Russian malfeasance. For instance, Ukraine's attack against the dam, which released the water, which created an ecological disaster in the Black Sea. Ukraine blamed it on Russia in hopes that the world would rally around it. Ukraine's threatening of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine's attack on the Kerch Bridge. All of these are designed to create a crisis environment that has global or regional ramifications in effort to get the world to rally behind Ukraine. And it's failed. We don't know what's going to happen with the grain deal right now, but one of the hopes of Ukraine was that Turkey would offer to escort ships, and that would put Russia in potential confrontation with a NATO Remember, Turkey has said they're not going to do that. And anyways, it's a moot point because the Russians are destroying the port infrastructure, so there's nothing to escort. This is just part of the overall decomposition, one would say, of the Ukrainian position vis-a-vis NATO. We saw Ukraine receive a serious setback at Vilnius when NATO refused to even articulate a time frame for potential Ukrainian membership in NATO. We've seen further setback in the Ramstein contact group meeting, where Ukraine did not receive the equipment they were expecting. And I think we're going to see Ukraine disappointed on the current front, that the world will not rally behind it on the grain deal. So an act of desperation that failed to achieve its objectives. And at the end of the day, 2 innocent Russians are killed. A 14-year-old girl has lost her parents and lies in the hospital bed severely injured. People's lives have been disrupted, and Ukraine is still losing the war.
Der russische Präsident Wladimir Putin kündigte eine harte Reaktion Russlands auf den Terroranschlag an. Und auch der ehemalige Präsident Dmitri Medvedev warnte, es werde keine Gnade für Terroristen geben. Wie wird die Reaktion Russlands aussehen und wird sie nur die Ukraine treffen? Immerhin betonte die russische Außenamtssprecherin Maria Zaharowa auch die Rolle Großbritanniens und der USA bei der Planung der Anschläge.
Russia, from the very beginning of the special military operation, has been warning the United States, Great Britain, other NATO nations, European Union nations, etc., to stay out of the conflict. They've put out a series of red lines, and many of these red lines have been crossed. Russia, I believe, continues to voice its displeasure at foreign intervention in the conflict, and Russia has labeled this a conflict not as a war between Russia or a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but a proxy conflict between Russia and the collective West, NATO, the United States, Great Britain. So, frankly speaking, the foreign ministry's statement is just the most recent iteration of saying the same thing, that Russia, from the Russia perspective, they know that the United States and Great Britain are involved, are to blame. It's a political statement with zero practical implications because Russia is not going to expand the war. This is what Ukraine wants. You see, Ukraine does what it does to create provocations to get a Russian overreaction that could be used to justify a NATO intervention. And Russia has been masterful at escalation management, preventing this from happening. So Russia will exclusively strike targets on the soil of Ukraine. Now, if a British target that was involved in the Odessa planning appears, I believe Russia would strike it. I don't think there would be any hesitancy on the part of Russia. Whether or not Russia would strike an American target of this nature is yet to be seen. Remember, if a lot of dead Americans head home in body bags, that could generate. Right now, Russia, I think, is, well, I won't say pleased. I think they're at least somewhat satisfied with the trajectory of the political situation in the United States, which appears to be moving towards Ukraine fatigue and a desire to get out of this conflict. So the last thing Russia would want to do is create an incident that enraged the Americans and reverse that. It got Americans talking about sending not only more support to Ukraine, but potentially sending Americans to Ukraine. That's not what Russia wants. So I think Russia is very careful in its responses to avoid this kind of overreaction. And there's no reason for Russia to overreact because right now Russia is prevailing on the battlefield decisively. I think one of the things that has emerged is a growing recognition by the collective West that Russia is not only not going to be defeated, but Russia is going to win and win decisively. You're starting to hear statements come out from major players in the Biden administration admitting that, even the president himself, we don't have any ammunition left to give. It's impossible for the United States defense industry to start putting getting production in place to replace the stuff that's being used in Ukraine. Ukraine can't succeed in the counteroffensive. We're not going to give Ukraine the F-16s, things of this nature. You're starting to see it all pile up, and you're starting to see voices that were used to be talking in glowing terms about Ukraine's destiny to have victory, now saying that Ukraine will not win this war. That's a reflection of ground truth. Russia is prevailing. I think the West is starting to also wake up to the reality that while Ukraine had received 65,000 trained troops in the last effort by NATO, that over 20,000 of these troops are now dead. The rest are doomed to die, and there's nothing left to replace them. Russia, on the other hand, has between 180 and 200,000 fresh reserves that have yet to be deployed into this conflict, reserves that have been training, organizing for the past several months. And at some point in time, Russia is going to commit these reserves to the battle. And when they do so, Ukraine will have nothing to respond with. And this will lead to a rapid devolvement of the military situation for Ukraine. This is Russia's perspective. So Russia's not going to do anything that disrupts this trajectory. So they're not going to attack the United States, attack the United Kingdom, attack NATO. They're going to continue doing what they're doing, but they will call out America and call out Britain for what they see as the nefarious nature of their actions.
Bleiben wir bei der Rolle der USA. Der US-Präsidentschaftskandidat Robert Kennedy Jr. hat betont, die von US-Präsident Joe Biden angeordnete Verlegung von 3.000 Reservisten nach Europa sei Teil einer Mobilisierung. Eine Vorbereitung auf einen Bodenkrieg mit Russland. Sind das nur Reden im immer heißer werdenden US-Wahlkampf oder ist da tatsächlich etwas dran?
Well, first of all, the involuntary call-up of reservists is always a big deal, because it means that the United States is doing something that requires additional military power. But let's look at the nature of the reservists. They're from the individual ready reserve and the select military reserve of the United States military. These are people. This isn't a combat unit. It's not that we're mobilizing a 3,000 strong combat unit. When we started building up military infrastructure in Poland, we've put in place what's called a corps level headquarters. I believe it's 5th Corps, but this corps is in cadre status, meaning that it's not fully manned. It's just got enough people there to keep the building occupied and keep basic administrative functioning going. But it's not ready for wartime work. It's not ready to do the kind of detailed staff planning and management that's necessary to operate a corps in time of conflict. The same can be said for the division level headquarters that's also in Poland right now, in cadre status. So these 3,000 involuntary reservists being called up are people who have been earmarked to each one of these headquarters. They've been training with them through their drilling over the course of the past several years. And so they're going to be brought up to bring the staffing level up to full strength at corps headquarters and the division headquarters. And this is important because right now the United States has 2 heavy brigades, I believe, deployed forward into Poland. We have another brigade in Romania. We have a striker brigade, that's a light armored vehicle brigade out there. That's 4 brigades. That's a little bit more than a division. We have 2 brigades of pre-positioned equipment, I believe. One definitely in place, another one, I believe, getting close. And if we bring those troops in, that's basically 6 brigades. That's 2 divisions. That's 1 corps. You have an aviation brigade. You have supplies. You have a lot of units, and they have to have a staff over them to control this. The United States has told Poland and NATO that we are serious about defending NATO from any potential Russian threat. We haven't been staffing this unit up because we had been operating under the belief that Ukraine was going to win this war. I think it's evident now that Ukraine will not win this war. And at some point in time, NATO is going to have to deal with a very large, victorious Russian army right across the border. and people are scared. Now, I don't think the Russians plan on attacking Poland or anything. I think Russia's going to have enough to do with in dealing with Ukraine. But from a NATO perspective, it's a threat that they never thought was going to manifest itself. And so the United States, in order to prevent NATO from panicking and to reassure its NATO allies that it is resolute in the face of any potential Russian threat, is bringing this core headquarters up to strength, the division headquarters up to strength, so that if need be, and these troops are brought in, they will be ready for combat on day one. That's the goal. That's the objective. It's a confidence building measure done to reassure NATO that the United States is committed to the defense of Europe. It's something that 6 months ago, nobody thought would need to happen because we were convinced that Ukraine was defeating the Russians. Now that we're convinced that the Russians are going to win this war, it's something that has to happen. So that's it. Is RFK Jr. correct? It does put us one step closer to a real shooting war with Russia. It's not an irresponsible action on the part of the United States given the overall situation, but it is an escalation. And the problem is that puts the United States and Russia both on a trajectory that could possibly lead to direct military conflict. So it is a step in the wrong direction.
Neben Kennedy haben sich zahlreiche US-Präsidentschaftskandidaten zum Thema Ukraine-Krieg geäußert. Der ehemalige US-Präsident Donald Trump glaubt, den Ukraine-Konflikt binnen 24 Stunden lösen zu können. Der Republikaner Ron DeSantis kritisiert insgesamt die militärische Unterstützung der Ukraine. Die Republikaner Nikki Haley und Mike Pence stellen sich hingegen komplett hinter Wladimir Selenskij. Ist die kommende Präsidentschaftswahl richtungsweisend für die US-Politik gegenüber der Ukraine? Findet tatsächlich eine politische Debatte statt über ein mögliches Ende der Ukraine-Unterstützung?
Well, first of all, we are far too early in the silly season of American presidential politics to take seriously anything any candidate, announced or unannounced, is saying. It just doesn't matter. The only voice that matters right now is the voice of President Joe Biden, of Jake Sullivan, of Tony Blinken, of Lloyd Austin, of Mark Miley. They're the only ones that count. You can throw in Congress, they count. But all these other players, from Trump to DeSantis and everybody in between, RFK Jr., they just don't count. They don't matter because nobody takes them seriously at this point in time because the presidential election cycle hasn't even begun yet. It's way early in the process. 2, the election is in November of 2024. The collapse of the Ukrainian army is taking place today, right now, before us. If you think that this current situation is going to exist in November 2024, I think you're probably going to have to check the food that you're eating to see if somebody puts some psychedelic drugs in there or something, because this war is going to be fundamentally over by then, or if it's not over, it'll be a completely different conflict than the one that's currently faced today. So I always believe that at this point in time, while it's always interesting to hear people talk, when it comes to actually assessing policy and policy implications, all these voices should be swept away. And the only voices that should be heard are the voices that actually have a say in what goes on in terms of formulating U.S. policy. Joe Biden is not losing any sleep over anything Ron DeSantis says, anything over Donald Trump says, or RFK Jr. These voices just don't count when it comes to the reality of the situation. When they do count is if they pass through the crucible of the primary process and they emerge as legitimate contenders for the throne. At that point in time, once the American people can say this person actually has a shot at the throne, then they'll be listened to. But until then, it's just noise, background noise. It needs to be put away. And the other thing we have to understand is that the Biden administration does not want to be facing this problem in the run-up to the election. So the Biden administration is going, because this is a liability. This is not a positive for the Biden administration. They need a resolution for this, and then they need to create as much time as possible between the resolution, which is going to be ugly, and the election, because the American people have very short memories. How many Americans are losing sleep over Afghanistan 2021 today? I mean, at the time, it was the biggest tragedy, embarrassment. This is a disgrace. No one's talking about it today. We've forgotten about it. And if Joe Biden can make the Ukraine problem go away, back it up with saying NATO's stronger than ever. Look, we've put these forces in there. We're ready. We're strong. We're big. By the time November 2024 comes around, nobody will be talking about this. It'll be a dead issue. And that's the goal of the Biden administration, is to make Ukraine a dead issue. And I think that that's going to be sooner rather than later, not because the Biden administration has anything to say about the timeline, but Russia's winning this war. Russia is the only party that matters at this point in time. They're the ones that determine how quick a military victory will be, and then what the nature of the political conclusion. Russia will dictate the political conclusion to this fight. And I think right now it's the United States and Europe are trying to figure out how to get in sync with the Russians so that at least they're talking the same language. If you take a look at how Selenskij is being pushed away, there's a separation, because at some point in time the divorce is going to happen and it's going to be ugly, and they don't want Selenskij standing too close to them when it happens.
Aber hier nochmal auf den Punkt, Scott. Was meinst du, würde ein Präsident Trump oder DeSantis die US-Unterstützung für die Ukraine beenden?
I think Ukraine won't exist by the time the US election rolls around, not exist as it is today. I think the Ukrainian problem will be resolved, and Ukraine will be different than what it is now. No one will be talking about Selenskij. No one will be talking about military assistance. Nobody will talk. What they may be talking about is the post-Selenskij government, and how China is going to, whether or not the European Union is going to help China rebuild a pro-Russia Ukraine that is neutral and never will be NATO. That's what they'll be talking about in 2024. I don't think they're going to be talking about how much money we're going to give Selenskij and all the NATO membership. These issues will be mooted and non-existent.
Schauen wir noch mal nach Syrien, Scott. Dort häufen sich in den letzten Wochen die Zwischenfälle zwischen der russischen und der US-Luftwaffe. Pentagon-Sprecher kritisieren Abfangmanöver russischer Kampfjets. Russland hingegen hinterfragt das Eindringen von US-Militärflugzeugen in den syrischen Luftraum. Als Reaktion plant das Pentagon die Entsendung weiterer Kriegsschiffe und Kampfjets. Was meinst du? Warum suchen die USA eine zunehmende Konfrontation mit Russland in Syrien? Soll Russland an einer weiteren Konfliktzone beschäftigt werden? Welche Strategie verfolgen die USA generell Richtung Syrien und Iran?
The U.S. presence in Syria was ostensibly to defeat ISIS, the Islamic State, and by and large that has been accomplished. But ISIS is an ideology as much as it is an organization, and you can't totally erase an ideology, especially when your actions contribute to the legitimization of that ideology. And as long as the United States is on the ground in Syria, it creates a vacuum of political leadership. And in the margins of this vacuum, ISIS continues to thrive. And so you see periodic actions by American forces in Syria targeting ISIS. A byproduct of this was the empowerment of Kurdish separatist autonomists in Syria. The YPG, I think they are the self-protection units, are an extension or an affiliate or allied to the PKK, the Turkish separatist party, Kurdish People's Party, which is labeled as a terrorist organization by Turkey and by the United States, by the way. And yet we're working hand in glove with these terrorists. We simply had them rename themselves. They're now the Syrian Democratic Forces, and somehow that makes it all better. but we've allied ourselves with them, and we use them to govern almost a third of Syria that's under our control. And we do this to destabilize the regime of Bashar al-Assad, which is one of our main objectives. And in doing so, to weaken Iran, because Iran and Syria are allies, part of a Shia crescent that we fear. So while we went into Syria under the guise of anti-terrorism, we remain in Syria under the real objective is regional destabilization to make life more difficult for Bashar al-Assad, for the Iranians, and in many ways for the pro-Iranian government in Iraq. We continue to exert pressure on Iraq's political processes to put in place politicians who are supportive of continued American military presence. We can't be in Syria without Idlib, where we have a major military effort that supports the Syrian operation. We can't be in Idlib unless we can run a convoy from Kuwait up into Idlib with all of our equipment. And we need an Iraqi government that's willing to allow this to happen. So all of this plays in. How long can the United States? Oh, let's throw in another one. Remember, we're not in Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government. So our presence is an illegal occupation by every extent. Probably even under U.S. law, since I don't know if U.S. Congress has actually passed legislation authorizing American forces to be in Syria. And while we're there, we're overseeing the theft of the natural resources of Syria, the oil, which is pumped out of the ground and sold to create tax revenue or at least income stream for the Kurdish autonomous government, which is our allies. This is a war crime. You're not allowed to do that. An occupying power is not allowed to steal the natural resources of the occupied territory and use it for its own benefit. But we're doing that. We're war criminals, but will not be prosecuted by the ICC because we're America. It's not a crime when we do it. But this is an untenable situation. It can't go on too long. What Russia is doing is part of an overall strategy together with the Syrians and the Iranians to make America's continued presence in Syria uncomfortable. Russia's not looking for a fight. They're looking to pressure America. Very similar to what China has done to the American Navy in the South China Sea and in the Taiwan Straits to challenge them, great confrontation. And the goal is to get the United States to become exhausted by this continued fight. The Chinese were successful in getting Tony Blinken to go to Beijing and begin a new China reset policy. And I think the Russians and the Syrians are trying to get the United States to leave Syria and allow the Syrian government to consolidate its power. I don't believe the Russians are looking for a fight. It would be foolish for Russia to get into a fight with America in Syria because ultimately the Americans overmatch Russian military capabilities in Syria. And it would be devastating, but it would also lead to a direct confrontation between the United States and Russia, which the United States does not want. So it's a dangerous game of cat and mouse taking place in Syria today. But the Russians are basically challenging American aircraft operating over Syrian airspace, noting and reminding them that you're not invited here. This isn't your airspace. This airspace belongs to Syria. We've been invited by Syria to be here. You haven't been. And we don't appreciate you bringing your air power close to areas where Russian troops are operating or Syrian government troops. And so you're seeing more aggressive maneuvering by the Russian pilots to make life as uncomfortable as possible for the Americans without actually going to war.
Die US-Strategie, einen Regime-Change in Syrien zu erreichen, Scott, ist augenscheinlich gescheitert. Warum bleiben US-Streitkräfte dennoch im Land präsent? Und wie lange werden sich die USA das eigentlich noch leisten können?
Look, we can afford it forever. We print money, so it doesn't matter. Money is not an issue. We can simply just print more money. And Congress has shown an absolute lack of intellectual curiosity about what's going on in Syria. This is a forgotten problem. Every once in a while we do a raid where Delta Force goes in, or Marine Raiders, or Navy SEALs. Probably not Navy SEALs in Syria. go in and they kill somebody and a bomb goes off and we had wounded warriors that were heroes now and we have an injured dog and we do all this stuff and it's all heart-rending. Oh my goodness, the brave. And we can do this forever. We can literally do this forever until it becomes a political problem. That's the issue. Syria will be resolved not by use of force, but when America just gets tired of it. It's not that we can't afford it, it's that we just don't want to do it anymore. It's no longer deemed to be in our interests. And I think sooner rather than later, I think at some point in time, our presence in Syria will be seen as detrimental. We're becoming more and more isolated. This is a strategy targeting Iran, but Iran's only getting stronger. Iran has joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a full member now. Iran and Saudi Arabia have made peace with each other. One of what we were doing in Syria was trying to bring Saudi money and Qatari money and other Gulf Arab money into Syria to empower anti-Assad forces. That's drying up. So we're running out of reasons to be in Syria. And sooner or later, we're just going to say, we're out of here.
Vielen Dank, Scott, für deine Zeit. Wir freuen uns auf nächste Woche.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Hab noch einen schönen Tag. Dankeschön.
Bye-bye.
Liebe Zuschauer, vielen Dank fürs Zusehen. Wenn euch die Sendung gefallen hat, teilt das Video bitte breit in den sozialen Medien. Abonniert eben noch unseren Kanal Gegenpol. Wir haben neben Scott Ritter auch viele weitere spannende Berichte und Analysen. Bis dahin, bis nächste Woche. Tschüss.